and welcome back to K-Chats. If you're liking our content, don't forget to like and subscribe. Today, we have a very special guest. We have Monique Alcala, who is the Chief of Staff at the National Organization of Women. Monique, welcome. How are you?
I am very well. Thank you so much for having me. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. So I did a little bit of research into your background, and I saw that you studied race, ethnicity, inequality, and political participation during your graduate studies at Johns Hopkins. What led to your interest in these topics?
That is a very good question. I grew up in Texas, and I feel like right now we're seeing a really interesting sort of political shift for a number of different reasons. But I was really motivated by just sort of having conversations. When I was in college, I worked in property management. I also worked in bars and stuff. And one of the things that I found like was sort of the overarching commonality is that I got to talk with people. I got to listen to their experiences. I did quite a bit of work with a nonprofit here called the Sims Foundation, and I heard a lot of people's struggles. And so I really became fascinated and interested at the college level, just learning about people, about structural inequality. And so I everything just sort of became like just an obsession, and I had no idea like what to do with it. Texas was interesting because it was going through a time of massive development, as we were talking about earlier, and I just sort of felt stuck. And so I ended up moving to Virginia, sort of trying to figure out like what else I wanted to do to pursue this interest in structural inequality, and I ended up just taking on a role in politics. And then sort of what made a lot of sense to me was sort of learn a little bit more about why our political system was the way that it was, and why do these structural inequalities exist. And so it led me to pursue a graduate degree, and looking at particularly race inequality was sort of something that naturally comes with race relations studies. And then because I was so interested in changing everything, looking at political participation was something that just came up as well. That's the short answer of like why I started studying it.
So you're now at the National Organization for Women, which is a grassroots feminist organization.
Mhm.
And a term that is being used a lot these days is white feminism. Could you explain to our viewers what that is, and why it hurts women of color?
Yep. So I think that in order for us to have a conversation around white feminism or toxic white feminism, we have to have a conversation first about white supremacy. That's where it's all rooted, and it's something that has really plagued our country, and also around the world. There's this sort of idea or ideal of health and wellness and success that is sort of centered around the idea of a racial hierarchy, and where whiteness is sort of like the standard of all of these things, and then everything else, people of color are sort of rated at the bottom, and that has really colored our understanding of the world and how we do advocacy, and how that plays out in sort of the women's rights space where I work now, and where in other campaigns and jobs that I've had, is that there's been a lot of conversation around women's rights, and this has been an ongoing struggle for hundreds of years. But whenever we think about women's rights, we often think about this very radical, strident feminist who is white, who is older, and so the problem with toxic white feminism is that it takes up that space. It doesn't allow us to talk and have a conversation around the people that women's rights, and particularly people of color, that those types of intersections, how that impacts our advocacy. So white feminism, there's a lot of like discourse in academia that talks about it, but it's sort of rooted in a lot of different sort of actions, I guess, and that is things like tone policing. Like, oh, we have a woman of color here, a Black woman, a brown woman, an Asian woman, who is talking about their experience and sort of maybe being in their perception, overly emotional about something. And so the response will always be, or response will often be, you would get more progress if you maybe toned it down a little bit, maybe if you were a little bit more diplomatic. So that is one example of something that we often talk about in these toxic white feminist spaces. The other thing would be around centering, and I think this is really important one, where we often center conversations about women's rights, or any type of advocacy around white women, and like white women have been doing a lot of work and a lot of meaningful work. I won't diminish that, but at the same time, when we're talking about women's rights and we're talking about the struggle, we also have to talk about this as an intersectional issue. Women of color, particularly Black, Latinx, Latino, Latina, and then also Indigenous women, we have different experiences because we are operating at that intersection of gender inequality, but also misogyny and those things that really hold us down. So there are other things like white savior complex is another thing that we tend to talk about. And so how women will often talk about, oh, well, I've done all of these things in order to advocate for you. Why aren't you giving me the benefit of the doubt, or like help letting me drive the conversation? So that sort of ties in with the centering thing. So we need to think about how we can sort of reshift our discourse so that it is including the people that it directly impacts.
Yeah, so what are you doing it now to address those competing school of thoughts? And is it possible to have a united front within feminism?
Yes, I will say unequivocally that I think that it is possible, but it is going to take a lot of work. Whenever we are, especially when we're doing coalition work and we're doing work around people that have not been well, whenever you have these competing ideas about what women's rights looks like, you do have a lot of women who have been doing really good work and who have been sort of the center of advocacy for a really long time. And so, in order for us to sort of shift the paradigm on women's rights and make sure that we're doing this with an intersectional approach, we have to get to a space where we are centering the women of color who have also been doing the work, but maybe they weren't the people at the front of the line, I guess, or they weren't the people that were centered in the middle of a picture or something. So it is gonna. I think we can get there. I know we can get there, but we have to have an understanding that all of this is built on trust. We're not trying to diminish or take away any of the great work that you're doing. In fact, every single feminist, any activist will say that we stand on the shoulders of giants, or the people who came before us. And so we just need to build together. And so a lot of that is going to be rooted in trust. And a lot of that is going to be rooted in having a relationship and developing an authentic advocacy that is that also ensures that people know that we can fight, right? You and I, me and other people are not going to see eye to eye on how we can make progress. Some people just are burn it down people. We want to, we're all or nothing. Other people are like, well, we need to make a little bit of progress in order to get X, Y, and Z. So we're always going to have arguments. And so what we need to get to is where we trust each other enough that we can have these arguments, and then we are always going to be there for each other like the next day and supporting each other. So in it with our victories, and also supporting each other when we have our setbacks, and that's what builds community, and that's what builds an intersectional movement.
So the last 12 months have really been a period of reflection for a lot of people. So for women out there who want to be allies, but perhaps they have fallen into a pattern of toxic white feminism, as a Latina, what would be your advice? What's one thing, one simple step that they can take to start addressing this problem?
I would say first and foremost, slow down. I know that we've all been operating, especially over the last 4 years when we had a different president. Everything has been difficult. One of the things that I find really beautiful about advocacy is that any conversation. This is why I work for now, and I will probably only work for membership-based organizations. That I meet people on a daily basis. A lot of them are repeat conversations. A lot of them are people who have leadership positions. A lot of them are people that are brand new activists. They all have a really wonderful, compelling story about why they got involved in advocacy. And a lot of it has to do with trauma. A lot of it has to do with something that they know that happened to somebody that they love. And so we have to keep these things in mind as we're doing our advocacy. And in order to be a better ally, like we've all gotten into this sort of mode of like we have to be responsive, right? If anybody's ever worked in advocacy, it's like constant. Like there were always things that were coming down from the administration at the federal level. There were things coming down from the local level. Right now, we're seeing a huge influx of repressive and draconian laws that are really trying to repeal back our voting rights. So there's always something that is happening to people, particularly people of color, and so the reflex is to respond, but we need to be a little bit more intentional about when we respond. Are we centering the people that are being directly impacted, or do we feel like that we are responding and we are speaking for other people? So first and foremost, for sure, slow down quite a bit and think about who are the other people we need to lift up into this conversation. Could I maybe bring them into this discourse, and listen to what how this law or how this thing that may be happening is going to directly impact their lives.
So one question we always like to ask our guests is, if you had the ability to ask the Biden White House anything at this moment, what would it be?
Oh, that is a great question. I'm a survivor of domestic violence. I think that the big thing for me has always been, and one thing that always drives me is violence against women. So I think like whatever we can do to pass the Violence Against Women Act, that is probably top of mind for me and a lot of our members.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thank you so much, Monique, for your time today. This has been very insightful and informative. And to our reviewers, don't forget to like and subscribe if you like this content. And we will be back soon with hopefully some more informative segments from K-Chats. Thank you for watching us tonight.